In today's video, we'll be ranking every Dead by Daylight killer and I will tell you how strong they really are. This tier list is assuming you play the killers on a relatively high level, but not inhumanely perfect against survivors who have a good understanding of how to counter them while not playing perfect themselves. Essentially, which killer stands the best in the harder games you can expect in public matchmaking. I hope you enjoy. I will take add-ons and perk synergies into account, but my biggest focus will be on what is the actual meta for each killer, to get a good, accurate understanding of their strength as they're actually played. Huntress, as an example, can be extremely deadly with iridescent head if you're willing to just camp the first survivor, but that is so boring as a playstyle that nobody could ever be bothered, which is why I will not consider it much. And we will start off with the S tier killers. These are the strongest killers in the game and can pretty much deal with anything survivors can throw at them if played well enough. And at this point in time, the S tier only has a single character left that deserves such a description in my opinion. And this one character is the Nurse. The Nurse combines excellent area control with the best chase power in the game, being able to efficiently control the map with their only weakness being her low map traversal speed. Nurse moves at 4.2 meters a second, meaning a killer with a basic movement speed would beat her in a race. But the moment she has a gen or a hook to control and the survivors can't utilize the entirety of the map, it is more or less over. She can also utilize a bunch of perks to a level no other killer can match. Our perks are effectively chase enders for the survivor. Since her only counterplay in chase is to break line of sight and move unpredictably, downing survivors while seeing the auras is incredibly easy. Since the majority of top tier regression perks are locked behind downing or hooking survivors, she utilizes them perfectly. On top of that, Nurse has a bunch of add-ons that further elevate her power level to levels that are unreachable for any other killer in the game. Overall, her area control and chase ability make her by far the strongest killer in Dead by Daylight and deserving of a lonely S tier spot. Our next killer sits between the ropes, not quite S tier anymore, but still better and more consistent than our A tier killers, meaning we'll put him in S-. We are talking about Blight, a killer that used to contend for the strongest killer crown, but since his 110 movement speed and pallet breaking change, he is not that strong anymore. He took a slight hit, making him more inconsistent on loops that don't favor his power and maps where his map traversal is hindered, like indoor maps. But make no mistake, even with the lower movement speed, a good Blight player can consistently secure hits around a lot of loops in the game, and his mobility is one of the best, making him excellent at utilizing both aura perks to get hits on unsuspecting survivors and slowdown perks, since he can travel the map incredibly fast to apply them. Especially gen kick perks make a lot of sense, since he can use them while recovering his rushes and then get right back into chase, a luxury not a lot of killers have, which is why he still remains above the A tier killers for me. Next up are our A tier killers. These are strong killers that can deal with most of the survivor meta quite well and exert a level of power that lets them take control of the match even if the survivors make very few mistakes. And the first killer in A+ is Hillbilly. Similarly to Blight, Hillbilly combines great mobility with lethality, even being able to one-shot survivors. His overdrive mechanic makes him chainsaw so fast that it also allows him to be able to outplay the majority of the loops in the game. Distance is no problem for him. He can arrive at a generator in seconds, making working any generator in a dead zone with no pallets or windows nearby a death sentence for survivors. All of this makes Hillbilly arguably the greatest snowball of all of Dead by Daylight's killers. Even with a relatively bad start, he can turn a game around with just a few well-placed chainsaws. But even if you consider all of these positives, he does not quite reach the power level of Nurse or Blight. And there is a good reason for that. He lacks consistency. Even with perfect execution, survivors can sidestep or crouch tech chainsaws. His anti-loop is not as reliable, making it possible for survivors to loop him for quite a significant amount of time. Since his chainsaw only travels a more or less straight line, indoor maps can greatly reduce his mobility and therefore his snowball potential, which is why he does not quite make it into S tier in my opinion. But nonetheless, Hillbilly is one of the strongest killers in the game, and if mastered, you can win almost every game with him. The next killer in this tier is Dracula. Dracula is the true definition of jack of all trades, master of none. His bat form gives him excellent mobility, even allowing him to switch floors in seconds and cut off loops. The Lapis Lazuli add-on being the meta choice for a lot of Dracula players and allowing allowing him to cut off window loops very consistently makes his already good chase even more deadly. The wolf form is a chase demon that can accelerate to 120% after picking up a taste orb, being equipped with a double dash and a third-person camera, making Dracula practically unloopable on high wall tiles. If the survivor doesn't manage to drop the pallet in time, they will probably get hit. And on tiles where the wolf form doesn't excel, the vampire kicks in with his Hellfire ability practically being able to shut down any filler pallet in the game, with a moderately low cooldown allowing for a great follow-up hit with the wolf. The Hellfire also makes unhooking when Dracula's nearby incredibly deadly, since he can hit both the hooker and the one who just unhooked. All of this gives Dracula a great kit to handle most situations with one of his forms. But even with all that, it can make him take a little bit too long to close down chases. Pre-drop pallets can be hard to deal with, and both Hellfire and the wolf pounds are reasonable to be missed if the survivor moves well, which can give survivors some time to do generators and extend the chases. Nonetheless, Dracula is a very capable killer that can handle almost every situation with ease. Next up is Kaneki. Kaneki's power level is hard to grasp. Being a relatively simple killer, it does take a lot of skill to control him as well as possible. He can injure survivors with very little effort and has arguably the greatest map mobility in the game, which allows him to play hit and run extremely effectively, while Deep Wounds provides passive slowdown for him to get rid of pallets and do damage to the survivor team. While his power vault has seen some significant nerfs recently, he can still use the cut-off playstyle to effectively outplay bigger loops and control survivors and the map. His biggest weakness is his lack of anti-loop and the inability to play certain tiles, but given the massive amount of techs his mains have learned over the past year, with the slingshot and the velocity slide being two of the most useful ones, Kaneki players can absolutely deal with the majority of things survivors can throw at him and dominate the majority of matches, what makes him the 5th strongest killer in the game as of today. Next up are the A- killers, who are still incredibly deadly given the right conditions, but this is where the first cracks start to show and some more weaknesses become apparent. The first killer in this tier is actually the first, also known as Vecna. The first combines great mobility from the undergate with what is probably the biggest 2-tap potential of any killer. If the Vine attack is aimed well, it is almost impossible to dodge. And just like the nurse, aura reading makes it impossible for survivors to hide away from the first and avoid him. Once Worldbreaker kicks, he can dish out injuries every few seconds, making him an excellent snowball killer. The fact that survivors have to use the clock to reduce the Worldbreaker timer also gives them great inbuilt slowdown, which also synergizes well with some perks. Especially Hex Ruin is an absurd perk on him if left unbroken. During the Worldbreaker, survivors will be busy healing and unhooking while simultaneously having to reduce the Worldbreaker timer, leaving no time to do gens, which forces the generators to regress with Hex Ruin. His biggest problem is the lack of deadliness outside of Worldbreaker, pretty much being a powerless 110 killer that has to hit survivors with a Vine or Undergate attack to get his strength back. He recently got a new best in slot add-on, Pizza Goggles, which makes his mobility way more consistent while denying him the ability to hit Undergate attacks. This trade-off is really worth it though. With this add-on, he can snowball even better than before, which allow him to easily overwhelm most teams on any map. But since his mobility is limited, and even with Pizza Goggles there's still a severe cooldown, he can sometimes struggle to deal with survivors who make distance with exhaustion perks, or if they have a great setup to break line of sight efficiently, giving him some weaknesses for survivors to exploit. Our next killer is Twins. Twins is a killer that fits today's meta quite well. With Victor, they have access to more or less guaranteed damage that is almost unavoidable on a cooldown, which is incredibly overwhelming for most solo survivor teams. Especially with totem builds, Twins can compound an amount of pressure that almost no team is able to deal with, but there's some significant weaknesses to exploit. Anti-slug and healing perks are their biggest enemy. Survivors who stay healthy for long times are almost impossible for Twins to deal with and can slowly grind them down. But since both of those perk archetypes are not that crazy meta right now, and Twins was never really popular as a killer, even veteran survivors are not that great at countering them, making Twins a killer that can stomp a majority of lobbies if you do not get soft locked on the way. Next up is Spirit. Spirit is a killer that used to be much higher up on tier lists, but a mix of power creep and sound bugs are keeping them down quite severely in my opinion. As a killer, Spirit relies on hearing the survivors and reacting to their sound cues. Sadly, sound in Dead by Daylight is consistently bugged and terribly inaccurate, making piloting her a lot harder than it has to be. Nonetheless, the ability to phase and go as fast as she can means she can shut down chases really quickly, and any injured survivor without Iron Will is an easy kill. Using her power for mobility means she will not have it available in chase, making the map traversal quite weak. With that, perks like Shoulder or Decisive Strike can hold her back quite a bit. Nonetheless, with all these downsides, her great chase means she can kill survivors quickly, which is the main job of the killer, leaving her in a high position on the tier list. Next up is Singularity. Dead by Daylight's robot killer excels at controlling the map with biopods, giving him both information and holding areas down even while not being there. He also has a handful of great add-ons that make it even stronger with longer range or less cooldown. In chase, Singularity crosses gaps to survivors very fast with slipstream and breaks pallets in record speeds in overclock mode, allowing him to create dead zones and control the map incredibly well. Singularity is the king of area control. Survivors can use EMPs to temporarily disable biopods or get rid of slipstreams, but the threat of them is very controllable and acts as a passive slowdown for the killer since survivors have to invest time to acquire them. Singularity does have a map problem though. On indoor maps, the area biopods can possibly cover significantly decreased, and with the limited amount that can be set, this can make him feel significantly worse. Pallet density also made his pallet breaking playstyle a bit worse, since there are a lot more pallets on the map on average. Our last A-tier killer is Oni. Oni's Blood Fury ability gives him one of the best chase powers in the game. The dash is fast and incredibly hard to dodge, but there's a twist. It is incredibly time gated by having to injure survivors and collect blood. Oni starts out the game as a normal 115 killer that has to earn his rights to his power. This needs great knowledge on how to outplay pallets and tiles early without having to waste too much time. This startup is what keeps him down from being a higher tier killer in my opinion. Once Oni gets going, he's a beast though that can deal with most tools that survivors can throw at him. His biggest enemy is survivors gatekeeping him from getting to Blood Fury well, and maps that make it either hard to get hits without the power or make Blood Fury pretty bad. Survivors who have easy ways of healing can also make the blood management incredibly hard and keep him out of power even after the first hit. Medkits or loading into RPD can turn an Oni match into the survivor's favor quite quickly. Now we're heading straight into the B tier, which has quite a bit of variety. On the higher end, the killers are still relatively strong in most settings and have some significant weaknesses or maps that make them a lot worse, where survivors can make quite a few mistakes and still come out on top. Our first killer is Chucky. Chucky has had a roller coaster on tier lists, with him being one of the most changed killers since his release. He has a strong dash attack that is incredibly controllable and allows for quite a bit of adjustments in terms of where you can dash at and what you can hit on a moderate 12-second cooldown. As a 110 killer with a third-person camera, Chucky has to be careful to use the slice and dice attack well or be left stranded as a slow, powerless killer for a considered amount of time. His power also gives him undetectable, which can allow for free first hits on approach, but his constant giggling tends to ruin those plans more often than not. Regardless, his third-person camera in combination with the dash makes a lot of tiles and loops rather easy for him to outplay if used correctly. And with that, he can dominate a lot of matches. As a pure chase demon with no mobility, Chucky does have to watch out for anti-tunnel perks and shoulder the burden, which could shut him out of getting an early kill and let the survivors get the gen stun before he can kill them. Another B+ killer, which a lot of players think is still high as Plague. Over the years, Plague has naturally fallen off. While she can still shut down a lot of good perks by denying survivors the ability to heal normally, her game plan can easily fall apart for several reasons. The fact that survivors never have to heal robs her of a lot of time that she does not get for killing, and the infection part of the early game means she always has to spend some time to get going. Nonetheless, Plague has exceptional add-ons that allow her for a great variety of playstyles that can punish survivor mistakes incredibly severely. If survivors misplay against this killer, it's over rather quickly. But survivors have grown smarter over the years, and even her incredible anti-loop while having the corrupt purge active can fall flat on occasions thanks to her lack of mobility and inability to properly outplay god pallets, which is why I think she's a B-tier killer in modern Dead by Daylight. Talking about modern Dead by Daylight, our next killer Artist has also had a bit of a fall off. Once considered one of the 5 strongest killers in the game, Artist's power greatly reduced abused over the years, halfway by survivors getting better at countering her, and the game just giving survivors more basic protection, which especially hurt her most efficient playstyle. A great artist can still shut down a majority of the loops and down survivors in a reasonable time frame, but the lack of mobility and multi-floor maps are extremely painful for her, denying her consistent pressure, making it sometimes feel like a race against the clock, which can be rigged against her. Great artist players can shut down loops in second with smart bots and leave survivors with no options, which is her strong suit. Her ability to get free hits via slingshot is also something that great artist players can utilize massively to make her shine, which can be very oppressive on maps that suit that kind of playstyle. Our next killer is Freddy, a killer that can sometimes feel like he's one of the best and sometimes incredibly useless depending on the setting. Freddy's snares can be a serious threat to survivors, and his dream pellets are now extremely deadly since the visuals got fixed and can zone survivors off entire paths or buildings if utilized well. The dream world also offers a nice amount of passive slowdown since survivors have to grab clocks to stay awake or face the threat of instantly getting hit by his dream power, while the teleport gives great map mobility, which makes him very consistent across a wide variety of maps. But there are some problems which are fairly severe. Freddy's snares get hard countered by Vigil, and even if a single Vigil is on a survivor team, it makes his power so much less threatening overall. And the dream clocks offer an immunity timer to survivors, which can make them unchaseable. This can greatly stop Freddy's momentum, which is why he can't quite reach into the A tier in my opinion. Right behind Freddy, we have Dead by Daylight's newest speed demon, Clown. Clown has been labeled a low tier killer for the longest time in Dead by Daylight, but with how much haste he got rocking, this is no longer the case. His yellow bottles give him an absurd amount of haste that makes catching up to survivors easy and also makes him incredibly lethal in looping situations, especially with extra haste add-ons. This can get ridiculous, where Clown's ability to close down chase can become hilariously strong. Nonetheless, Clown still has to reload and has to chew through god pellets, which can rob him of his momentum and stop him from reaching higher ranks in my opinion. Next up is Springtrap, who just got some nice buffs to his cooldown. Springtrap is a killer that oftentimes gets labeled as a low tier, which in my opinion greatly stems from how punishing his power is when misused. Both the doors and the axe are deceptively hard to use properly. In comparison to Huntress, Springtrap got a lot more movement speed when holding his axe, which is why he's just flat out better in chase in my opinion, but he pays for that extra chase potential by his lack of zoning. After missing or even hitting the axe, not being able to threaten a follow-up means survivors will always have a few seconds to get comfortable in the looping situation again, which is what ultimately stops him from being a really strong killer. His theoretical potential is sky high. You could in theory orbital survivors on long wall loops or go for cool shots with the arc, but playing safe is just so much better considering how much cooldown a miss means, which makes him a little bit dull at times. His doors, which make him play very similarly across a different variety of maps, provide him with good mobility, but they're not completely consistent across the board, sometimes spawning very far away from the generator that they're meant to be connected to. Up next is another killer that just got some neat buffs to his power, Unknown. Unknown is a jack of all trades, master of none, with his teleport providing sometimes excellent mobility that can cripple survivors and be one of the best area control abilities in the game, and sometimes flat out useless if survivors dispel the right hallucinations. The UVX attack might just be the most punishing killer ability to mismanage, but does provide him with great chase potential if used properly. But survivors still have a lot of agency over UVX, and missing it against a good survivor is very reasonable and realistic, which can sometimes lead to very long chase times and bad matches for the Unknown. Considering you always have to bounce to the ability, there are certain maps with weird collisions that make some UVX shots bounce in ways that are totally unpredictable even for Unknown mains. Unknown can make use of almost any perk in the game, especially with undetectable perks. He can get a surprising amount of pressure that survivors almost never see coming. Overall, Unknown has great potential to get great results, but even the greatest Unknown mains sometimes just fall short, which is why he's only in B+. Houndmaster is a very weird case. She has everything a killer would want: tracking, mobility, and a great chase power on a low cooldown. But even though all of this comes together, she does not really work out to be as strong as she once was praised to be. Part of the reason for this is the unpredictability of Snug. The dog leaves many things to be desired in terms of consistency. Sometimes not following Houndmaster properly makes making the power literally unusable, and sometimes the path that is shown is just not the path Snugs ends up taking. His pathfinding on the search command is also very odd. To make her even more inconsistent, survivors can now just decide which side they want to drop the pallet on, even when they get caught by Snug, which makes her chase power a lot worse. Houndmaster is a killer that could be so great, but as of right now, she lacks consistency in almost every possible aspect she could have, which is why she's only middle of the pack. One thing she has going for herself though is how well she can use perks. Almost every perk you could think of works on her, and quite well. Next up is Wesker, which might just be one of the hardest killers to rate in this tier list, because he is getting buffs that might make him shoot up even higher. Like almost everyone else in this tier, Wesker was once considered a top tier killer, but since his infections got nerfed, he never truly recovered. His power can outplay a lot of loops, but the cooldown is incredibly long, making missing very punishing. And considering it is for survivors to just sidestep his power, there will definitely be misses even on the best Wesker players over the course of a match. If played close to perfection and on a good map, he can still look like his former self, but on some maps, getting great value out of the 2 dashes can be a challenge. He does have great add-on variety though, which is always a plus, especially with the Ag add-on halfway being put into base kit now. The lower cooldown after using the power will compound to make a big difference over the course of a match to make him feel more in line with the modern killers. He is also pretty buggy right now after his refactor, which should hopefully be fixed within a patch or two, so I'm not considering it in a major way for this tier list. Deathslinger is a killer with incredible highs and some of the lowest lows. He is without a question one of the best killers in terms of chase, but getting close enough to the survivors can be tricky. With the cigar or even iridescent coin add-on, which are pretty meta, he can down survivors extremely fast, but there's some maps and setups that can make this a lot harder. Deathslinger doesn't have much to outplay god pallets and will have to catch up after breaking them. His area control is excellent though. Having a hook or generator to protect is what makes him strong if the maps allows for it. But some of the maps make his power feel dreadful. Without line of sight, he exerts very little threat, which is why I don't think he can go much higher. But don't get it twisted, Deathslinger can outplay a lot of things survivors can throw at him and throw them off with some cool shots thanks to a small projectile. Our next killer is probably one of the most controversial ones on this tier list. Krasue is a killer who went on a wild ride since joining into Dead by Daylight, and at this point in time she is quite mid, which is kind of funny considering on release she was definitely a contender for the S tier. Her biggest weakness at this point is survivors who body block for each other and force her to transform back to body form, making her extremely weak to altruistic survivor teams. The act of infecting and then transforming can waste quite a lot of time that survivors use to repair generators and escape. Her chase power on affected survivors is still really good though. Her vault is a lot worse now, and the endgame build, which is now getting a lot more traction, is honestly pretty hilariously strong, especially against uncoordinated survivor teams. But all of this is not enough to pull her much higher than this. Our last killer in B+ is Lich. Lich, as of right now, is the highest kill rate killer in Dead by Daylight. That does not necessarily mean he's the strongest though. Lich did get some nice buff to his flight last year some time back with lower cooldowns and the ability to body block, which made him a lot better to play. But he has one of the worst add-on sets in the game with very little variety possible. His long cooldowns on the spells are incredibly punishing, given that only 2 of his spells are reliable ways to get hits, Mage Hand and Fly of the Damned. Missing 1 or more means Lich lacks lethality to close down his chases fast enough. But if mastered, especially with his spell cancelling, he is hard to read and is absolutely possible to down even the best survivors relatively fast. Over the course of a game, however, it can be tricky to not get stuck in at least one longer chase, which can rob him of all of his pressure, which is why I consider him a middle of the pack killer. Now we are getting to the B- killers, and this is where in my opinion real weaknesses start showing and survivors have to make quite a few mistakes for you to pull ahead, with some of their powers having significant weaknesses on some maps or settings, which can make them a little bit annoying to play. And we start off with a killer that has fallen off harder than almost anyone else, Pyramid Head. Now it's pretty surprising considering the add-on rework he got was mostly really good, but nobody on earth plays this killer anymore at this point after these changes, and the reason for this are the base kit changes in my opinion. Survivors got endurance out of the cage, which which definitely made the gameplay more interesting, but robbed Pyramid Head of one of his biggest strengths, and the even bigger loss was the reduction of movement speed while having the sword down to 105%, which means zoning down pallets became just a dreadful task that took so long that it wasn't really worth it anymore. With all of this, it does seem like Pyramid Head is just a shadow of his former self that can't even be saved by the fact he has a pallet breaking add-on. He does have a lot of really good add-ons, including one to destroy pallets, which can give him a little bit of the zoning power back that he once had. His chase is still decent, but his inability to deal with exhaustion perks and the rest of the survivor matter really does show, and he's not as strong as he once was. Myers might just be one of the hardest killers to rate in this list. He definitely became a lot stronger with his newfound power, but it does take him quite a while to get going. With his 105% stalk speed start, he is very vulnerable to get looped early, and once the power starts, the survivors have to start chugging pallets left and right. Playing around them is not really worth it for the Myers, which means breaking them is by far the best play. And this creates a race what runs out faster, generators or pallets. Against uncoordinated teams, Myers does really well, but the weaknesses start showing, especially with pallet density and the amount of pallets on some of the maps. It can be difficult to keep up with him. His ability to mori survivors and outplay some perks like Decisive are a nice bonus, but not enough to give him a major boost. Has to be said though that he has a lot of good add-ons, which gives him some variety to run and makes him a little bit harder to predict. Next up we have Nemesis. Nemesis is a killer which has big consistency problems. Half of his power are zombies, which can sometimes interrupt survivors, sometimes even win you games by themselves, but the very next game they start making out in the middle of the game, which makes him crazy inconsistent and hard to rate. His tentacle does provide a very consistent outlet for damage, but he still needs to hit survivors 3 times, which can lead to relatively long chase times. Some loops are harder to play for him given the restrictions of his power, which can make it difficult to get good pressure going. Since last year, there's also a delay on the attack after pulling out the tentacle, with no input queuing on the attack itself, which feels really clunky and bad to use. Nemesis does have really good add-ons. Licker Tongue raises his power level quite severely by slowing survivors down more after the initial infection, and zombie speed add-ons can actually make the zombies significantly more consistent. He does excel at tunneling survivors, which a lot of Nemesis players happily take advantage of, which is one of his strongest suits. Next up is Xenomorph. Xenomorph is an extremely interesting killer to rate the power level of. Their tail attack can be very versatile, and the tunnels provide them with good map coverage, but they have a natural counter to their own power built into their kit. Flame turrets, which essentially force Xenomorph to interrupt the chase and break them. If doubled properly, they can burn Xeno out of power and completely waste a lot of the killer's time and pressure. Especially around strong main buildings, this can be a huge time waste that can stop Xenomorph from really getting into the game. The add-ons of this killer are also not very versatile, but the harpoon gun is still going strong, which can be really strong in combination with a hex build. But as of yet, the majority of the player base seemingly did not catch on. How strong Xenomorph really is greatly depends on how well survivors are using flame turrets, which makes him relatively frustrating to play in my opinion. The next killer in B- is Wraith, a killer that gets underrated quite severely by a lot of people in my opinion. Wraith can be extremely strong given the right build, being able to switch between hit and run and a more chase-oriented playstyle based on which map he's on, making him one of the most adaptable killers in the game. But he does have trouble dealing with some of the survival meta perks, and getting stuck in chases fairly easily, which can be his downfall. Nonetheless, when mastered, Wraith can dominate a majority of his matches, not the strongest, but at least consistent. Next up we have Huntress. Dead by Daylight's most played killers also fallen off quite a bit over the years. More cluttered maps, more or less favorite palettes, and survivors has simply gotten better. Does that mean Huntress has nothing going for her anymore? Not at all. Her ability to hold down an area is almost unrivaled, and the quick 2-taps thanks to the low hit cooldown can allow to get some good snowball moments going. Huntress also lacks synergy with a lot of the meta killer perks, although she does have a lot of good viable add-ons which gives her a variety to choose from. But none of this can distract from a weak ability to close down chases and and outplay a lot of pallet loops, which really holds her back big time. Talking about killers that are being held back, our next killer is Trickster, who just got his rework to be a 110 killer, and to be honest, he did not get any better with the rework. On one hand, he does have some really strong add-ons now that keep him alive, but 110% on Trickster in today's game is really rough. Distance is very hard to deal with, especially created by exhaustion perks, and the main event not being activatable next to Hook robbed him of some of his strongest snowball potential. The S-rank buffs of not decaying laceration is a very neat addition that does give him more options to split the pressure, but overall Trickster's lacking in the strength department and mainly gets carried by his eerie add-ons, especially the photo card and secret project combo. Now, it is still true that he can punish survivor mistakes extremely severely, but getting there can be extremely gruesome at times. Next up, we have Pinhead. Pinhead had a major falloff. With the original Pain rework, he lost one of his greatest add-ons, and overall, the killers is getting dated. With his license being lost and there being almost no chance of any updates, he might just be a lost cause at this point. Pinhead does have the chain hunt to get some pressure on survivors, but if played really well, his anti-loop can get him some fast downs. But on the other hand, he breaks his own chains, and some maps really just don't favor his power at all. Survivors have also gotten smarter at playing around the chain hunt, and he is certainly not unplayable, but with him having almost no strong add-ons left, he really struggles to keep up in modern Dead by Daylight. Our last killer in the B tier is Knight. Knight is a killer that can develop a lot of pressure, especially with totem builds that can overwhelm the majority of teams. His Carnifex guard also allows him to break pallets incredibly fast, giving him some surprisingly good lethality in chase, but this is also very inconsistent. Getting hunts with the guards on the less favorable maps can be gruesome, and smart survivors just don't get hit by guards anymore, making it a rough task to get real pressure going. The ability to chase two survivors at once sounds nice, but if you don't get hits on either, it really does not work out as well as you might think. Each hit and down on the Knight takes quite a bit of time you oftentimes don't have, leaving him in a rough spot, which can make it very difficult to kill survivors and win. Now we're getting into the C tier. These are, in my opinion, the true low tier killers of Dead by Daylight for one reason or another. Winning with them against good teams is a feat, and the survivors can make plenty of mistakes and still come back. The true underdog role. The first killer in this tier is a Bubba, who has gotten some nice buffs in the latest patch, but this is sadly not enough to elevate him out of this tier. Bubba has suffered immensely from pallet density, which made his pallet zoning ability significantly worse. With there being more pallets on the maps on average, his ability to create dead zones is too slow, and the generators get done by the time the pallets are gone. Now his chainsaw just got significantly faster base kit, but he's still very easy to loop for survivors, and his map pressure is incredibly low. Relying on the only 2 to 3 add-ons they can possibly bring, and needing to bring Bamboozle every match, he is very predictable in terms of loadout. Not bumping around tight objects and using tokens at the perfect time is also unnecessarily complicated with very little reward. While strong Bubba mains can definitely still make his power work, it does require a PhD, which is why Bubba is almost gone extinct at this point in time. Next up, we have Legion. Legion is a killer that has some good strength, but their power is incredibly easy for survivors to outplay. Let's first talk about the positives though. Legion does get some good mobility from their frenzy and can outplay survivor body blocks really well. In power, however, survivors can counter them in multiple ways. Spreading out or tanking hits after being hit into mending can deny chain hits very effectively, making the frenzy attack incredibly underwhelming. And for the down, Legion almost completely relies on basic attacks and bloodlust. At this point in time, almost any Legion player I see uses iridescent button, which allows him to break pallets after vaulting, which is something you kind of need to keep up nowadays. But even that can be countered by survivors spam vaulting the pallet or by attempting to pick up the pallet with any means necessary. This leaves Legion in a spot that almost makes him bully material against good survivors, requiring him to put chase bugs on like Bamboozle. Is it impossible to make him work? No, it works in a lot of matches, but if you get good survivors, you're probably screwed. Our next killer is Doctor. Doctor is a killer that has a lot of things in his kit: tracking, passive slowdown, and anti-loop. But without question, this killer can work given the right circumstances, but none of these three mentioned aspects of his power are particularly strong or forceful. The tracking of static blast can be nice to get into the next chase, but the passive slowdown from the tier 3 madness and the anti-loop are just not enough for him to be a threat in modern Dead by Daylight. Dr. Chase is one of the most interactive in the entire game. Sadly, interactivity oftentimes means bad things for the killer side of things. It means he can be outplayed and looped, which is definitely true if the survivor passes smartly and doesn't let himself get zoned too hard. Pallet density also made that aspect of his power a lot worse, since if the survivor has more option, shocking becomes inherently worse. One thing Doctor is going though, some surprisingly strong perk synergies thanks to his power. Haste perks make his shock work way better than anti-loop tool, and skill check perks can be extremely effective on him given the madness buffs, even on the higher level. But all of these upsides are sadly not enough to get out of low tier hell, so he'll remain here for the foreseeable future. Next up is another killer that just got some nice buffs. Sadly, he's also still stuck in low tier hell. Demogorgon now gets more undetectable out of portals and a higher speed when shredding, but he also greatly suffered from pallet density in a similar way to Bubba, being unable to shred the pallets in time, and this has not really changed at all. His undetectable gets made a lot worse by the fact that he's really loud and his shredding is still rather outdated as an ability. Nonetheless, some well-placed shreds can make quick work of a survivor thanks to the low recovery cooldown. But in order to make Demo work well, you need to be an expert at playing around loops, and even then survivors still have a lot of room to outplay you. Crouch tag is also incredibly punishing for Demo. If a survivor plays their crouch well, even an easy shred can become incredibly complicated, which is why he's still down here in C. Now we are getting into the C- tier. These killers are not quite total bully material, but they're in my opinion some of the weakest killers in Dead by Daylight, and you have to become extremely good to consistently win on them. And even if you master them, if the survivors play really well, you can't really deal with the things they can throw at you, and you oftentimes just lose by being outparked. Survivors can make a plethora of mistakes and they will still come out on top. Our first killer in this tier is the Pig. Pig was the first killer release I witnessed back in 2018, and since then she has gotten buffed a million times over, but her ambush is still really clunky and the head traps are nice slowdown, but not enough to make her a forceful killer. It has to be said, in comparison to the early years of Dead by Daylight, the ambush has come a long way and can actually be used to outplay a lot of tiles now, especially with the add-ons to make it stronger. But if survivors just pre-drop the pallets, it's all for nothing. Is it impossible to do well on Pig? No, but the nature of mostly being an M1 based killer with passive slowdown just does not work out well on the high level in modern times. Pig also is just another victim of pallet density, which made her a lot worse in my opinion. Our next killer, Sadako, a killer I personally really enjoy playing and that oftentimes does not feel this weak if played as well as possible. But don't get fooled, Sadako's power mostly relies on survivors not knowing how to counter her, which is still very common even amongst veterans, because she got re-rocked several times and never had a high play rate. The condemn mechanic is a nice touch, but actually using it to kill survivors is not really feasible against survivors that know how to counter her on a majority of the maps. Her passive phasing is a nice touch in terms of anti-loop if survivors do not drop the pallets, but just like Pig, pre-dropping shuts this down almost completely, leaving it in gimmick territory. If good survivors try their best, you need to be an absolute master to even stand a chance, which makes her an extremely low tier killer, even though she has one of the highest kill rates. Nonetheless, she can snowball quite well if survivors are not careful with condemn, since you can only reduce it by taking a tape from an active TV, and Sadako can turn them off at will by teleporting. Our next killer is Dredge, which in my opinion is quite similar to Sadako in several aspects. Dredge has a lot of things going for him: global mobility, zoning anti-loop, and the Nightfall, which can give him a lot of information and lethality. But none of these tools can't be circumvented by survivors. Dredge's anti-loop is not crazy bad, but the survivor has to be stuck at the pallet for it to be strong. If the survivor's not totally stuck and has the option to leave the loop, it is just not worth that much. Dredge's locker teleport can be insanely strong if the gens are in the right spot next to him, but locker RNG is one of the biggest problems and ultimately what makes me think of him as a low tier killer. Some of the maps have total locker dead zones, which make his mobility sound better than it actually is. On the other hand though, maps like Midwich can make Dredge an absolute demon that feels like he's one of the strongest killers in the game. Ultimately, he's too inconsistent in my opinion to be ranked much higher. Our last killer in the C- tier is Hag. Hag is one of the bottom 4 killers and probably the most bullyable killer in the game if she does not have one of her EW add-ons equipped. If you still play at this point in time, you got my respect. Survivors have an absurd amount of tools to nullify her power, and since she's a 110 chasing normally, is also not really viable. If there is a survivor harassing the web by triggering the traps and then running away, you are doomed and there's nothing you can do to stop them. Survivors can also just look backwards and they will always be out of lunge range when triggering a trap, even with the trigger range reduction add-ons. If you try to not swing, you have to build up momentum, which takes so long that the survivors will definitely make the next pallet or window, making a chase unfeasible. Survivors can also wipe the traps now, but why would they if they can just waste the time by baiting a teleport? Contesting the power is a losing battle for the hack, which makes it a total joke in my opinion, and definitely one of the worst killers in Dead by Daylight. She does, however, have a good amount of snowball potential and can punish mistakes a lot more severely than the killers below her, which is why I think she does not deserve to be in the D tier. Our last tier is the D tier. These are the worst killers in Dead by Daylight. Playing them and winning requires a lot of practice, and the payoff for using the power well is just not a lot. Survivors who are trying will easily beat you, and you should only get a few hooks even if you're close to mastering their power. All of these killers desperately need buffs to stay viable in today's game. The first killer is Ghostface. Ghostface has the ability to stealth and expose survivors. Very simple and still one of my favorite killers. The ultimate stealth killer in Dead by Daylight: sneak up, expose. Sounds relatively simple, but sneaking up can be harder than it sounds. Once survivors know who the killer is, they can play it safe, and the lack of anti-loop makes the downing part extremely hard at times. Pallet density also means creating dead zones has become a lot harder, and the amount of open maps make playing him incredibly dreadful at times. Playing a match of Ghostface on Gashaven or Bloodlodge is just pain and suffering. The power's a gimmick at best, and looping him is extremely easy. Now, he does have some useful add-ons, especially drop like Knife Sheet can make him feel a little bit more threatening after exposing, but all of this can't hide away the fact that efficient play can and will beat Ghostface any day of the week, no matter which loadout Ghostface is bringing. Now, to the two killers I consider bottom feeders in today's economy: Trapper and Skull Merchant. A lot of you will probably be surprised who's at the very bottom, so I'll discuss the matter together. In my opinion, Trapper has the better add-ons which allow him to crouch a tiny bit, but make no mistake, the only real threat a Trapper has is the basement, which is pretty easy to avoid once you know who you are playing against. Trapper's power can increase a lot with some of the stronger add-ons like Bloody Coil or Holding Stone. His main power is very easy to circumvent by survivors. If they just look on the ground on the majority of maps with tall grass being completely gone in today's game besides Swamp, Trapper's power is truly just a gimmick. But even if you manage to catch a survivor, they can escape the trap in literally 5 seconds if they just get lucky enough, which is quite frankly extremely ridiculous. You spend more time collecting and setting the trap than it takes a survivor to escape if they escape first try. And keep in mind, there are 4 survivors and 1 killer. Your time is significantly worth more than 1 survivor. The time you invest in setting up traps is just not worth it on average, a gimmick that will probably end up with you being the laughing stock unless you get that basement hook and shack, which is the only power play Trapper has. Good teams have no problem demolishing the power and forcing him to be a basic attack killer. And our last killer, Skull Merchant. Yes, I'm sorry Pixel, but I truly believe at this point in time, she is the worst killer in the game against capable opponents, and her power is mostly a gimmick. With no stealth modes on her drone and no real strong add-ons she can crutch on, Skull Merchant does not have much going for her. Yes, her setting time is a lot faster, and unlike Trapper, she doesn't have to invest much time setting up, but on the other hand, her power is just not that useful. Her undetectable is so long that you can get some free hits with it, but all in all, her chase pressures is not enough to be meaningful, and perks like Resilience make her feel extremely bad since the haste hinder you get from the power is just not enough to be meaningful. She also has some of the lowest perk synergy with any of the killer meta perks, and her tracking on the radar is very lackluster. Now, I will say I commend how far the Skull Merchant mains have taken this killer and that kind of finesse they possess, but at the end of the day, if the survivors know what they're doing and crouch the last stack with the drones and force a basic attack, it's just not enough to be a real threat, which is why I think she's the weakest killer in Dead by Daylight. Her power is oftentimes so weak that you're better off playing into Bloodlust, which is a sad state to see, and hopefully she will be made stronger in the coming months. This is my complete tier list. Let me know what you think in the comments. Very curious to hear your opinions, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.